Think spring break is all sunshine and poolside parties. Think again. These 4 terrifying tales take you from deserted beaches to eerie mountain cabins, where blood-chilling encounters and paranormal nightmares await. Buckle up. Once you hear these stories, you'll never look at spring break the same way again. I had never visited the lost beach house before that spring break, but everyone who'd gone told me it was the perfect spot to get away. It stood at the farthest end of a deserted stretch of sand, where no resorts or tourists ever came. My friends insisted on staying in town, hitting the bars and clubs, but I craved solitude, so I rented the place by myself. Sometimes I regret that decision more than anything else I've done in my life. The house had been built decades ago, with weather-beaten wood that moaned under my feet. The front porch faced miles of empty shoreline. The caretaker, an old local man named Matteo, had handed me a set of tarnished keys and warned me half-jokingly, "Don't stay out after dark." I shrugged it off as local superstition. Perhaps an old wives' tale about the tides or vicious jellyfish, I thought. I should have paid more attention. The first night was uneventful. I made a sandwich, listened to the waves, felt a slight thrill at having the whole place to myself. But I woke around 2 a.m. to a scratching noise at the window. The wind, I told myself, something brushing against the shutters. In the morning, I was so certain I'd been dreaming that I forgot about it altogether. I spent the day sunbathing and reading, feeling a sense of complete freedom that I rarely experienced back home. That evening, I decided to walk up the beach. After a few minutes, I glanced back at the house and paused. Something moved behind one of the windows. A dark shape, impossible to see clearly. My stomach clenched. There shouldn't have been anybody else there, and I was certain I'd locked the door. My mind began spinning. An intruder? A burglar? Maybe a drifter drawn by the emptiness of the place. Against better judgment, I sprinted back. The house was silent when I went inside. The living room, with its old faded couch and a single lamp, felt colder than usual. I checked the doors. They were still locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. Possibly my imagination, I thought. I had been alone too long, that's all. But that night, I woke again to that scratching. This time, it was coming from inside. The noise was faint but persistent, a slow scraping along the floorboards in the hallway. My heart pounded. I rose from the bed, grabbed a flashlight, and tiptoed to the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. The single window at the far end let in a sliver of moonlight. I shone the flashlight, revealing nothing but dusty floor. Then came the noise again, from behind me. I whipped around, shining the light near the kitchen. Shadows shifted, and I saw a flash of movement near the cabinets. I flinched, let out a shaky breath, but there was nothing there. At least nothing I could see. When the caretaker came by the next morning to ask if I needed anything, I nearly told him what was going on, but I stopped myself. He was just a local. He might think I was some city kid who couldn't handle being alone, so I just asked him for more bottled water. His eyes flicked toward the house, as if searching for something in the shadows. "You stay safe," he said quietly before leaving. I noticed he didn't smile. I tried to keep busy, packing a lunch and heading outside again. The beach was empty as ever. The ocean's vastness was comforting at first, but by mid-afternoon, the loneliness turned suffocating. My eyes kept drifting back to the house. Windows stared at me like dead eyes. My mind churned with what might lurk inside. Finally, as the sun began to set, I mustered the courage to return. Inside, I paced from room to room with a hammer clutched in my fist. I'm not sure what I thought I'd do if I actually found someone. Maybe I just needed something to make me feel less vulnerable. By nightfall, the interior walls seemed to close in on me. Every noise seemed amplified. The wind outside, the creaks of the old wood, the soft rush of the tide in the distance. Then came the third night. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a tremendous crash. My bedroom door slammed open. The wind? Or something else? Heart pounding, I scrambled to flick on the lamp. The corridor beyond was pitch black. I heard floorboards groan. Terrified, I yelled, "Who's there?" No response, but I sensed presence. And then, as my eyes adjusted, I glimpsed the figure. It was tall, gangly, features partially hidden by the gloom. It twitched as though every bone was set wrong. I was so scared that for several seconds I couldn't move. The figure took a step forward. My mind screamed for me to run, but my body refused. Then came a horrid scraping noise, like nails on wood. The figure clawed the door frame with elongated fingers. I don't know how I found the strength, but I scrambled up, hurled a chair in its direction, and ran out into the hallway. I could hear a rasping breath behind me. I fled toward the front door, flung it open, and stumbled onto the porch. The wind battered me, and the darkness of the beach swallowed my vision. I didn't even have shoes on, but I kept running, the sand slipping under my feet, until I could no longer see the house or the shape following me. I spent the rest of that night huddled by an old fishing shack, shivering in the salty air. When morning light broke, I gingerly made my way back. The door was still ajar. Nothing looked out of place. No broken furniture, no sign of forced entry, no footprints. You'd think I had dreamed it all, except for the deep gouges along the bedroom doorway. When I ran my fingers over them, they felt like proof of something sinister. I left that same day, grabbed my suitcase, hopped in my car, and didn't even glance in the rearview mirror until I hit the highway. I told the caretaker I had an emergency. He didn't ask questions. Something in his eyes said he already knew. I've never gone back to that beach. Each spring break that followed, my friends would joke, "Remember that time you freaked yourself out at some old shack?" I'd laugh along, but it never felt funny. I still wake sometimes at night, recalling that scrabbling at the door. And I swear, in the corner of my eyes, I sometimes glimpse a tall, twisted figure lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I pray it's all in my head, but deep down, I know better. There were 4 of us, me, Alicia, Darren, and Lucy, best friends since high school. We decided to spend our spring break in the mountains instead of the beach. A friend of a friend owned a small cabin overlooking a steep gorge, miles from the closest town. No noise, no tourists, just us and nature. It sounded perfect. On the drive up, we laughed and sang along to music, excited to leave deadlines and stress behind. The cabin itself, though rustic, looked charming at first glance. It had a single floor plan, 4 bunk beds, and a picture window facing the gorge. The caretaker left a handwritten note with instructions for water usage and a warning. Don't wander after sunset. The trails are dangerous. We assumed he meant steep cliffs or wild animals. The first couple of days were normal. We hiked, roasted marshmallows, and stayed up late telling ghost stories around the fireplace. We half believed we were living a cliché horror movie setup, but that was part of the fun. None of us truly felt afraid. Until the 3rd night. Alicia woke me just after midnight, her eyes wide. "I heard something outside," she whispered. I listened. Sure enough, the distinct snap of twigs echoed in the darkness, like someone walking around. I saw Darren wake too, rubbing his eyes. Lucy pulled her sleeping bag closer. Could be wildlife, I told myself. A deer, maybe a bear. We had left some food scraps in the trash can outside, so it was plausible, but the footsteps sounded too controlled, too human, and they circled the cabin. Once, twice, then paused near the window. I noticed the flicker of a silhouette. My heart hammered. We realized with dawning horror that we'd never locked the door. Darren and I rushed to secure it. The metallic click of the deadbolt felt like a shield against some unknown threat. All we could do was wait. The footsteps eventually retreated. For the rest of the night, I only managed fitful sleep. In the morning, we searched the area. We found fresh footprints in the dirt near the trash. Alicia picked up a crumpled cigarette butt that definitely wasn't from any of us. Lucy tried to laugh it off, but her voice shook. Some random hiker, she suggested. Maybe a vagrant. We all nodded, desperate for a reasonable explanation. That day, the feeling of unease lingered. We took a short hike together, sticking close, reluctant to split up. By afternoon, the clouds rolled in, bringing thunder that rattled the cabin walls. We decided to stay in. Alicia and I played cards while Darren cooked lunch. Lucy sat by the window, watching the gorge. Sometime around dusk, a flash of lightning illuminated the opposite cliff. For a split second, Lucy swore she saw a figure standing there, staring straight at our cabin across the ravine. Night fell with a ferocious storm. Rain pummeled the roof, wind lashed the trees. We bolted all the doors and windows. The power flickered, plunging us into semi-darkness. Around 10 p.m., Lucy started feeling ill, complaining about a headache. She lay down in a bunk. I offered her water. Then, out of nowhere, a single knock came at the front door. We all froze. Another knock, louder this time. Darren whispered, "Who is it?" No response. We exchanged worried looks. "We have nothing valuable here," Alicia called. The knocking continued, relentless now. Darren inched toward the door, brandishing a kitchen knife. I hovered behind him, adrenaline pumping. Then it stopped. Silence reigned, broken only by Lucy's ragged breathing. I relaxed a fraction, but my gut said this was far from over. Suddenly, thunder shook the cabin. The power cut out completely. Total blackness. Alicia screamed. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, heart in my throat. Illuminated by the bluish glow, I saw movement near the window. A face, or something close to a face, pressed against the glass. Pale eyes glinted in the lightning, and in the brief flash, I saw parted lips revealing yellowish teeth. A primal fear seized me. My mind tried to rationalize, but only raw terror remained. Darren lunged at the window, trying to scare it away. The figure vanished. Alicia was hyperventilating. Lucy clutched at her stomach, moaning that her head felt like it was splitting. I decided then and there we had to leave. Storm or no storm, we needed to get to the car, find help. "Grab your coats," I yelled. We huddled by the door, weapons, knives, a fireplace poker in hand. Darren counted to 3, flung the door open, and we rushed outside. Rain stung my face, the wind howled, and the mud sucked at my boots. The car was parked 50 yards away, near a lone pine. In the chaos of lightning and darkness, I glimpsed a blurred shape scurrying behind the trees. I shouted for everyone to hurry. Lucy lagged behind, wincing in pain. Alicia tried to steady her. Then a roar of thunder drowned out all sound. A flash of lightning illuminated a nightmarish sight. That figure again, crouched on top of the car, staring down at us with a grin that froze my blood. Darren didn't hesitate. He ran at it, brandishing his knife. With an inhuman hiss, the figure leapt off the car, darted into the darkness, and vanished. We piled into the car, drenched and terrified, Lucy trembling in the back seat. I jammed the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. Relief flooded me. I threw the car into reverse, but the tires spun on the wet ground. For a heart-stopping moment, I feared we were stuck. Then, mercifully, the wheels caught traction, and we peeled away from the cabin. The ride down the mountain was a blur. We slipped on the mud, slid near a drop-off that nearly sent us over the edge. But we made it to the main road, eventually rolling into a tiny gas station lit by a single flickering bulb. We must have looked insane, soaking wet, panting, eyes wide with terror. The attendant stared but didn't comment. At that moment, I was just grateful we were alive. Lucy ended up going to the hospital for a severe migraine caused by stress and dehydration. The rest of us just tried to cope. We never learned who or what we'd seen. Some say it was a deranged person living off the grid, waiting for unlucky visitors. Others think it was something else, something that didn't belong in this world. All I know is, ever since that night, none of us have returned to that mountain. The memory is enough to keep me wide awake on stormy nights, waiting for another knock at the door. I chose Cancun for my final college spring break. Sun, nightlife, and that wild energy the city was famous for. At the last minute, though, I booked a smaller place outside the busy hotel zone. I'd read it was cheaper, quieter, and you could still get to the clubs easily enough. My cousin Mia agreed to come along, and we hopped a flight, excited for a week of beaches and fun. The house we rented was in a residential area, surrounded by stucco walls and a rusted iron gate. The owner, a soft-spoken older woman named Carmen, greeted us in Spanish. She handed us the keys, along with a bizarre warning, "Be respectful." They do not like loud strangers in the house. Mia and I shared a confused look, then brushed it off as local superstition. We unpacked, then hit the beach. By the time we got home, the sun had set, and the mosquitoes were out in force. We found ourselves swatting them away as we unlocked the door. That's when the strangeness began. As soon as we stepped inside, the temperature dropped. I'm talking an ice-cold chill, like we'd walked into a refrigerator. We fiddled with the thermostat, but it was set to a balmy 75 degrees Fahrenheit. We laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was just the AC malfunctioning. After dinner, Mia turned on the TV while I showered. Partway through washing, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps in the hallway. I assumed it was Mia. Then the lights flickered. I yelled for her to check the breaker. No reply. Mildly annoyed, I shut off the water, wrapped a towel around myself, and opened the door. Nobody there. The hallway was dark. "Mia," I called. Silence. I rushed to the living room to find Mia trembling, the remote clutched in her hand. "What happened?" I asked. She swallowed hard before speaking. I saw something in the reflection of the TV, a person standing behind me. My stomach twisted. "Was someone here?" She shook her head. When I turned around, there was no one. We tried to reassure each other, searching the small house from top to bottom. Doors locked, windows locked, no sign of forced entry or intruders. Finally, we decided it must be nerves, combined with exhaustion from the flight and the partying. But that night, everything changed. I woke to the distinct sensation of being watched. The air felt colder than before. My skin prickled. Beside me, Mia slept fitfully. Then from the corner of the room, I heard breathing, a rasping inhalation, as if from a throat half clogged with water. My heart slammed in my chest. I reached for the lamp on the bedside table, flicked it on, and the room flooded with light. No one was there, but I heard footsteps outside our door, pacing back and forth, heavy and angry, like the steps of someone furious but trying to contain it. Then a loud bang, as if a fist pounded the wall. Mia jolted awake, eyes wild with fear. The overhead light flickered off, then on, then off again. The banging repeated, more insistent now. My mind whirled. Could this be a home invasion? We decided we'd had enough. Bolting from the bed, we tried to open the bedroom door, but it wouldn't budge, as if something pressed against it from the other side. "Open it!" Mia screamed. I threw my shoulder into the wood. The door burst open, sending me stumbling into an empty hallway. Empty, but frigid, like stepping into a winter's night. The walls vibrated with a sort of low hum. I heard a whisper, impossible to decipher, drifting from the living room. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely think. Mia grabbed the car keys and we sprinted to the front door, fumbling with the lock. That's when the shape appeared, translucent but undeniably human-like, standing in the living room's threshold. Its eyes were mere pits of darkness, no features, just a shifting outline, and then it let out a guttural moan that made my blood curdle. We froze. Every survival instinct in my body screamed to get out, but fear held me in place. The shape glided forward, lips forming voiceless words. Mia let out a cry, and the figure whipped its head toward her. For a moment, the air filled with a sour, decaying smell. Then, as if summoned by that stench, more shapes flickered along the edges of the room. Pale faces, hollow eyes. I nearly fainted from sheer terror. "Mia, move!" I grabbed her hand. We managed to fling the door open and stumble out onto the street. We didn't stop running until we reached a small convenience store, panting and crying. A group of locals stared at us in alarm. One woman approached, concern on her face. In broken English, she asked if we were hurt. We just shook our heads, too stunned to explain. In the morning light, we worked up the nerve to return, briefly, to gather our belongings. The house felt still, though the lingering coldness persisted. We didn't explore. We stuffed our bags into the trunk and drove straight to a hostel in the hotel zone, ignoring the stares of passers-by. Later, we found Carmen. We demanded to know what was going on. She looked pained, apologetic. She confessed that she'd lost her husband and 2 children in a tragic accident years ago, and their spirits were rumoured to remain in the house, angry spirits that despised visitors who disrespected their space. Perhaps we had unknowingly offended them. The rest of that spring break was spent in a cheap hostel, but at least we had other travellers around us. We slept little, jumped at every shadow, and stayed out late in public spaces, too afraid to be alone. I can't say I've returned to Cancun since. Even now, I recall those hollow-eyed shapes and that sickening stench of decay. Sometimes, in my nightmares, they whisper to me in a language I still can't understand. It was supposed to be a simple road trip with my boyfriend, Sam, and our buddies, Jen and Mike, for spring break. We planned on crashing at a cheap roadside motel every night until we reached the West Coast. The car was packed with snacks and music, and for the first leg of the trip, everything was carefree. We laughed, played road trip games, and dreamed about sunbathing all week. Trouble started when Mike insisted on taking a shortcut. He'd read about a back road that cut through desolate desert land, promising a quicker route. The sun was setting as we turned onto a narrow asphalt strip that stretched into the horizon. No other cars, just an endless line of telephone poles. An hour in, the sky darkened to a moonless black. The car's headlights felt feeble against the surrounding emptiness. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a battered pickup truck appeared in our rearview mirror. Its headlights shone bright. Sam was driving and tapped the gas to give us some distance, but the truck sped up too, tailgating dangerously close. "What's this guy's problem?" Jen muttered, unease creeping into her voice. Suddenly the truck lurched forward, swerved around us and cut us off. We screeched to a halt to avoid collision. My heart hammered in my chest. Then the truck rolled forward a few yards and stopped. We waited, breath held. "Should I back up?" Sam whispered. Before he could decide, the truck's driver door opened and a man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted by his own headlights. He marched toward us, something glinting in his hand. A crowbar. My stomach twisted. He slammed it against our hood, metal on metal, sending shockwaves through the car. Jen screamed. "Drive, drive!" we shouted. Sam threw the car into reverse, wheels squealing. The man pursued, crowbar raised, fury in his eyes. Once we were far enough back, Sam spun the car around and floored it. We kicked up dust, leaving the man behind. We sped down the highway, with adrenaline blazing, hearts pounding. Mike grabbed the phone to call the cops, but there was no signal. The next town was miles away. Who knew how far? I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting the pickup's headlights to appear again. The road remained empty. We thought we were safe until we saw lights ahead. A single flicker, stationary in the distance. As we approached, a wave of dread washed over me. It was that same battered truck, parked diagonally across the road, blocking both lanes. "He must have taken another route or driven off-road," Sam muttered, voice trembling. "No way around." Desert stretched out on both sides. As we slowed, the truck's driver door opened again. The same man. He stood there, crowbar in hand, a twisted grin on his face. My mind screamed, "Don't stop," but Sam hesitated. If we tried to ram past, we might wreck. The man banged the crowbar on the truck, taunting us. In a burst of desperation, Sam veered off the pavement, tires crunching scrub and gravel. The car shook violently, bouncing over uneven ground. The man sprinted after us, roaring something unintelligible. The truck's engine roared as he jumped back in and gave chase across the desert. Headlights danced in the side mirror. Dust choked us, forcing Sam to slow down for fear of flipping the car. Then, with a jolt, our wheels dipped into a dry creek bed. We were stuck. I could hear the pickup growling closer. Everyone was yelling at once. I scrambled out of the car, stumbling onto the hard-packed dirt. "Run!" Jen screamed. We dashed across the open desert, adrenaline fueling every step. Behind us, the truck's doors slammed, heavy footsteps pounding the ground. We found an abandoned shack half buried in sand, broken planks for walls. There was no door to latch, just a gap we squeezed through. Inside, the darkness was thick, and the air reeked of rot. We crouched low, hearts pounding, trying not to cough. Footsteps approached, then stopped just outside. I heard ragged breathing. My muscles tensed, ready to bolt if he came through. A moment later, a second set of footsteps joined the first. Another voice, lower, menacing. "Split up," I heard one of them say. My blood ran cold. There were two of them now. We'd only seen one. My mind reeled. Maybe a partner had been hidden in the truck. Then they started throwing something at the shack, rocks or debris. Planks splintered, and we pressed ourselves flat against the far wall. "We know you're in there," a voice crooned. I fumbled for something, anything to defend ourselves. My hand landed on a rusted pipe. Better than nothing. Suddenly, the entire wall collapsed with a crash. Dust exploded, filling my lungs. Light from the moon cast eerie shadows. The tall figure loomed in the gap, crowbar raised. Sam threw himself at the man, tackling him to the ground. They grappled, curses and grunts filling the night. Jen and Mike took off through the hole, sprinting for the darkness. I hovered in terror, pipe in hand. The second attacker rushed in, swinging what looked like a machete. I screamed and blindly swung the pipe. It connected with a sickening crack. The man roared in pain. Sam scrambled to his feet, grabbed my arm, and we fled. We raced across the desert, lungs burning, convinced every footstep behind us was our end. By some miracle, we found a dirt road that led to a highway. Headlights illuminated the horizon, a passing car. We waved frantically, nearly collapsing with relief when it stopped. A young couple inside, startled by our appearance, let us pile into their back seat. We begged them to drive. Jen and Mike had gotten there just seconds before us, equally frantic. In the safety of that stranger's car, we looked back and saw no one following, just the ghostly outline of desert shrubs. We reached the nearest gas station, called the police, recounted the whole story, through shaky breaths. They found no sign of the men or the truck. The entire area seemed deserted, as if those monsters had vanished into thin air. That night remains burned into my memory, a horrifying testament that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the emptiness of the desert. We eventually reached the west coast, but our carefree spring break was ruined. We hardly slept, haunted by nightmares of crowbars smashing into windshields or machetes gleaming in the moonlight. I've heard rumours of travellers going missing on those back roads. Whether those men were a local gang, crazed predators, or something even more sinister, I'll never know. But every time I pass a stretch of lonely highway, I catch myself gripping the wheel until my knuckles turn white, my eyes scanning the rear view for battered trucks that might appear out of the darkness.